We're watching the healthcare AI shift and transition from really being a technology industry to becoming a reimbursement industry.
The federal government is recognizing that we can practice medicine smarter. Sanjay, you and I always talk about driving smarter cancer care. This is the first palpable step I've seen the federal government say, we recognize the value and we're going to start paying you back.
Healthcare AI companies are really they're no longer a software-only company. They're reimbursement companies that now happen to actually build software. So they're building the software as they go, and now there's a tangible value both to the end user and to these companies. So it's going to be pretty fun.
Welcome to the AI in Healthcare podcast. My name is Dr. Sanjay Juneja. I'm a hematologist and medical oncologist, and my co-host, Douglas Flora, is the same, as well as a leader in the AI oncology space. And today, we are discussing something that's really kind of overdue, but also feels a little nerve-wracking knowing that it's already here. And that is the opinion from the government and from things like CMS on exactly the what and how when it comes to being able to take AI tools and AI technology and actually make them actionable, which, as we know, require things like reimbursement. And is it, a SaaS or a software, or is it a service, or is it like a device? How are we going to make sense of these things? And at what kind of level are institutions and practices going to be held at, or what is the standard on how much one should involve those things? Doug, if you will, introduce our listeners to kind of who we have today, why he's the right person for this, and really how big of a deal this is.
Hey everybody, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whenever you're watching this. It's a fun one. We threw this together very quickly because the world shifted a little bit this week in AI and healthcare, and we wanted to go to the source for Jordan Johnson. If you guys don't know him, he brings more than 20 years of experience across radiation oncology. First as a therapist, we could talk about that, medical oncology, healthcare finance, rev cycle, compliance, and now healthcare law. And he's equally comfortable talking about a Supreme Court decision as he is a LINAC and now healthcare AI. And he's one of our Tensor Black buddies and certainly inside the fold. So we called Jordan, said, man, we need you to help us decipher what the federal government shared with us this week, because for the first time, we're talking about software as a medical device, and some big changes are afoot.
Absolutely. I mean, this is exciting. I think all roads have led up to this, and it's like, okay, now it's actually here. And Sanjay, I think you bring up a good point, is now it's tangible. Okay. And I don't even think we're talking about, CMS. I don't even think this is about AI. I think it's something larger. And Doug, you brought it up. I think we're watching the healthcare AI shift and transition from really being a technology industry to becoming a reimbursement industry. So now that reimbursement's going to matter, and we're going to have some pretty big impact. And I think it sounds a little controversial, but I think and believe healthcare AI companies are really they're no longer a software-only company. They're reimbursement companies that now happen to actually build software. So they're building the software as they go, and now there's a tangible value both to the end user and to these companies. So it's going to be pretty fun.
Let's tell us what the what and the how. Why are we saying this? What happened?
So sure. No, absolutely. So, CMS is about this time every year, everybody gets anxious. So they come out with the proposed rule, and we wait in July and for it to come out, and it comes out in July. And so it drops. And once it drops, we see that, everybody runs through the 1,000 pages of reading and all the Excel files and to see what the impacts are. But in this, as we unpacked it, once CMS, the 1850P, which was the proposed rule for the OPPS, came out, it went over a bunch of this. And what they said was, listen, we're going to move forward. We're going to assign certain CPT codes for certain services. We're going to put a reimbursement for those services. And now we're going to start tracking it into we're going to expand this even more. So that's what they said. They know this is just the beginning. We're going to expand this even more. And then, like I said, today, probably 10 minutes ago, we had the freestanding side, which everybody also waits on, finally dropped. And it'll be interesting to read that, because I think we're going to see the exact same thing on the freestanding side, that this is the direction. This is CMS signaling that moving forward, it's not we may dip our toe in the water of AI and what we can use it for, but listen, we're going to embrace this, we're going to integrate it, and we're going to pay for it. And if we're going to pay for it, that means we're also going to monitor, benchmark, and at least have some oversight.
Sanjay, this is I mean, I talk about this all the time. Everybody knows that there's some promise here. Nobody knows how to pay for it. And so even those of us that are early adopters, that are leaning in, that want our mammograms overread or our CT scans overread or better diagnostics in the pathology lab with those digital pixelated slides, nobody knows how to pay for it yet. And so this is the first glimpse that we've had of the day that AI stops being a device or a supply and becomes a billable clinical service. And so that's where I get excited about this, because I know it's a heavy lift, guys, but it's going to save more lives. It's going to reduce the burdens that we're carrying in healthcare. And we all talk about these efficiencies that we're supposed to find. I can't tell you the number of times this week I've heard the terms financial headwinds with all the changes in Medicaid and Medicare Advantage reimbursement. We're all looking for answers. And one of the answers that's staring us straight in the face is digital. And I think the federal government is recognizing that we can practice medicine smarter. Sanjay, you and I always talk about driving smarter cancer care. This is the first palpable step I've seen the federal government say, we recognize the value and we're going to start paying you back.
So if we could, Jordan, break this down for me. Like, we're billing this as a clinical service. Can we talk about some examples of how other things that we're familiar with are billed as clinical services as it is, if any? And does that mean that it's, a clinical service done by the provider? Is it a clinical service done by the actual facility? And obviously where I'm going with that is obviously, the accountability or who's assuming responsibility. How does this exactly fit into something we are familiar with when it comes to clinical services?
So like right now, and I think using radiology is the best example, is so we have a reimbursement that the hospital has for actually running the scan, doing the MRI, doing the CT. That's a hospital reimbursement. They bought the equipment, they own the equipment, it's reimbursed. But also there's that radiologist that's going to read that scan. Radiologist is going to get paid a fee for that. And so we have the hospital side saying we're going to pay for the service in the OPPS. So they're going to pay for the service. My guess is on the side, on the MPFS, they're going to pay for, if the physician's engaging with it, if they're reading something from it, that they're going to pay for that. I think, to your point, basically they're defining healthcare AI as something worthy of its own payment. So you brought up software as a medical service. It's kind of a new concept through a separate pathway. And that's really what CMS was driven for, is they proposed this dedicated set of codes to treat 10, starting with 10 medical services, and they used a new status indicator for these services to reimburse for them. So I think most people think that reimbursement means money. I think reimbursement, to your point, now means accountability. And that's what they're going to be looking for, is, yeah, you see the money, but now you're going to be accountable for it. So it's very similar, again, to the way radiology, think of it that way, is somebody's got to buy. It may be the hospital that buys whatever the software is. But if there's an interaction, you're going to be reimbursed for that too. So there'll be reimbursement for the actual software itself, and then reimbursement for the engagement.
And when you say OPPS or freestanding, what is that distinction you're alluding to?
So there's two sides of the coin. The hospital CMS defines OPPS as the hospital, any hospitals, and then they define freestanding as what we call the MPFS, the Medicare Physician Fee Schedule. And so there are two different fee schedules. There are two different proposals of the rule. They usually come out at the same time. This year, clearly was a week and a half delay between the two. So that's really what people are looking for now, is to see, okay, we saw the hospital side. There's a status indicator, 10 codes, reimbursements assigned to it. That's great. Now on the physician side, when we look later on today, we'll be able to see, okay, what's under the hood there? Is there going to be reimbursement? And I mean, it's big. And if I'm a creator, if I'm a developer, if I'm a company, I think for the past decade, and Doug, you can probably touch on this, is we've spent so much time competing on algorithms in all of this. So whether it was radiomics, whatever it may be, but competing on algorithms, and then everyone just watched and wanted the most accurate model you could possibly have, the highest sensitivity, the highest specificity, the lowest hallucination rate. But today, I think those things still matter. But now that CMS has signaled this, I think they're becoming those items that I just mentioned are now the price of admission to get in. That is going to be what we talked about earlier. Is some of this is going to become a commodity, and there's going to be a new competitive edge where some of that was the old competitive edge.
Yeah, and I think we've got to be clear for our audience. These are proposals, right? When these things come out, we get OPPS 27. That's not the final ruling. It'll get weighed in on. All the constituent hospital groups will argue this. All the constituent private practice groups will argue that. I think what we're seeing, though, is there is signal here that the federal government is recognizing value and how they pay for the value. You guys know how the federal government works. This is a net neutrality. So if they take away site-specific payments for the 340B program, that's going to go this year, it looks like, to radiation oncology with huge, huge upticks, long overdue for radiation technical fees and more complicated radiation treatment planning. So 340B hospitals will lose in that equation, but 340B hospitals that have strong radiation programs integrated will probably balance that out. And so for us, we are not 340B at St. Elizabeth, Jordan. We are a hospital outpatient department. We're watching these things very carefully. And the margins in healthcare are generally razor thin. Anything that you do to start to reimburse for services that we know we need is not a cause for celebration. It's just relief. And we went through this. Sanjay, you were way too young, I know, to recognize this, but we did this when they integrated the electronic medical record, 15 years ago. And they eased it in for 3 to 5 years where we had an escalating sort of reimbursement coding for making those heady investments in all the hardware, all the software, all the EMR, equivalents back then that they aren't around anymore. Most of those are gone. And then if you didn't hit that mark by year 5, you were in trouble. And there were penalties assessed. They give you 5 years to lead up. And I think Jordan, we're probably going to see that again, where there's going to be an incentive for us, an S code or something, to tell us we will reimburse you for making these investments to digitize your pathology deck. Your slides should be digital. We will, and Sanjay, for Tempus, they're going to be adding codes for AI interpretation of genomic data above the original lab report. And, so if you're a radiation oncologist, you're doing adaptive treatment planning, that'll be $800 or $900 reimbursed to that healthcare system for that program proposed. Again, allegedly. I'm talking to a lawyer now. But these are promising, and it's going to be the devil's in the details. We all say it 6 months from now when these things are final rulings. But what it's telling everybody out there who's making these strategic bets is that you can start to look forward to AI in your building with some level of government mandate, security, reimbursement.
And that's always been the problem, right? Why do I want to put this in if all I'm going to have to do is pay for it? Like, it sounds great. Is it a nice to have or is it a need to have? If it's going to become a need to have, I need to see it in ink. And finally, we saw it in ink. And now we see it, even though it's proposed, most of the time, whatever we see in proposal, some form of that does move forward. We don't ever see it completely cut out. So we expect to see some form move forward, which I think is going to be huge.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, that might come out of it, and I'll be the first to admit I'm a little ignorant when it comes to devices and prostheses, but there's this kind of designation where, like, you can have something that's basically not studied from, the very first piece of carbon to what it ends up being, but it functions or operates or is what's the phrase? It's non-inferior, or similar to what that initial approval and kind of check mark is for when it comes to devices and things. How is that going to, really play into these AI tools where you have so many variable components, right? I mean, from the quality of the large language model to how often these, auditing processes might be happening to, recursive self-governance versus, like, not having a human in the loop to be able to do that governance. There's just so many different parameters when it comes to something that's not algorithmically coded that I think is going to be extremely challenging to say this is a truly apples to apples situation.
Oh, I agree. And I think one of mine is how in the hell do you keep up? Like, how do you keep up? This is evolving so fast. We're like, when drugs came out, we're still using the same drugs from 1970s. Okay. The drugs have evolved, but we're still using it moves slow. This is, I mean, you're talking every 8 or 9 days, things are getting better. How do they keep up? So if you have great AI, that's awesome. Then what does the FDA strategy look like? So they're going to have insight and they're going to have a strategy. What does the clinical evidence baseline look like? Now we know there may be CMS reimbursement. So if we go from CMS reimbursement, commercials are going to look at it. So then there's going to be commercial reimbursement. To Doug's point, what's my priority list on hospitals for implementation? Which ones do we implement? Which ones do we pick? And then what's my documentation? What do I look like? What is the audit press or what does the audit cycle look like? To your point, and I think that's the one of the big things. I was just scrolling through here, looking at um, some of the documentation, but it requires more than just evidence, right? It doesn't require more AI, it requires more evidence. And I was looking at this where yesterday's governance was an AI committee, policies, risk assessments, vendor reviews, security approval. Tomorrow's governance, and this was somebody who put this together, and they're right. I mean, it's who invoked the AI, under what authority did they even have, which model, and you said this, produced the output, what data was used, what was the AI even allowed to do, and what recommendation was generated, and then the last one was what became part of the legal medical record. So that, and the thing is, yesterday's governance versus tomorrow's, that's not a difference in 5 years ago and 2 years from now. This has all happened in very short order.
Jordan, think about this. So I know you probably read this, and Sanjay, I know you love this guy. So Dario Amodei wrote this amazing article years ago called Machines of Love and Grace, and he's talking about what these tools could mean for us. And so this is just to set the scope of what this might mean for us in healthcare. So he talked about this being the compressed 21st century. And if we looked at the pace of change that these tools that are readily available already are able to offer us, we could do the entire 20th century's change in medicine in 20 years, and then in 5 years, and then in 2 years. So what he posited in this, and this is a great article. If you guys haven't looked this up, Machines of Love and Grace, just Google it. It is mind-blowing, and it's a couple years old. He talks about what happens if in 20 years we can get 10 developments, the equivalent of CAR T and CRISPR, right? That's compressing a century of medical stuff into 10 years or 5 years. So in the article, he goes on about how we'll cure infectious disease and we'll lengthen survival by 2% per year, and all these details that you guys will love if you're listening to our podcast. That doesn't happen without some level of a nudge, something that makes healthcare systems embrace these technologies. And Jordan, I spent 2.5 hours on this a couple days ago, reading through this stuff myself. I think this was the nudge. I think we're going to look back at this moment when these things came out and these proposals tell you what Dr. Oz thinks. They tell you what the FDA commissioners will think. They tell you what the drug approval process will say. And the thing that I think is interesting that you linked earlier, maybe 10 minutes ago, Jordan, is they're tying it to outcomes. We've never had that before. So no longer is it vendor says this, or, it is going to be tied strictly to the changes in behaviors of a patient, the changes in outcomes for an ER utilization or a readmission or mortality or whatever. That gets me excited because now people are being held accountable for everything they're saying.
Doug brings up a good point. Remember the way it is now in medicine, right? If the physician can't document it or didn't document it, it didn't happen. It wasn't reimbursed. Well, moving forward with this, the evidence is, can you prove it had clinical impact?
Yeah, I mean, it's, what you can do with a lot of this technology today is just so different than this manner of like, okay, show your receipts, kind of like the kids are saying on social media now. And like, you got to write it out, you got to print me this, you got to tabulate that. And now, as these, health information exchanges get better, as TEFCA has come in and it evolved, as these direct integrations with natural language processing and LLMs happen, this data harmonization has made it to where you can basically, quote unquote, check in and really be able to pull out specifically your metrics of interest. You could say, okay, I want to know what's happening to all the non-small cell lung cancer patients or the small cell lung cancer patients as it relates to the appropriate use of immune therapy based on PDL1 scores of XYZ. And you can just pull that stuff, fairly well, a lot easier than you used to be able to do. Now, I'm interested to see how that's going to evolve to, the whole identified, de-identified part, because you'll still need to be able to show this or prove this and have it in a de-identified manner, which I think would be a little bit challenging, because if we're publicizing, all of this at too great of a rate, especially when you have outlier cases, it could be a little bit of a challenge. But nothing that hasn't been tackled when it comes to finding utility in real world data in a de-identified matter. But my point being is, you can just track that stuff easier. And I wonder if they're going to start to really kind of bake that in into this newer age concept of being able to justify the use of certain instruments and tools. The second piece of this that I find both interesting and concerning is really your ability of what is amenable to what tools. Meaning, Doug, our friend Connie Lehman, her technology when it comes to mammograms has been able to not only be in the guidelines, but say, hey, you can use this AI assisted stuff to be able to appreciate whether it was prognostic or diagnostic, I can't remember with clarity, insights. But I recall her saying when we were talking with her that the fact that some places had a 2D mammogram and they weren't 3D or topo, where her algorithm fit actually was kind of a barrier to what was possible on that same imaging at certain sites. And that there was possibly going to be like a Rosetta Stone of sorts to be able to convert that so that you could hopefully apply to the same algorithms that were there. My point being is there's a bunch of challenges ahead that we're really just going to have to figure out together.
No, I think you're spot on. I mean, we're going to figure some of this out together. And one of the biggest pieces you brought up is the AI governance. And I think that's the one thing that scares a lot of people is privacy. Like I said, I mean, we all, if we knew data would just transmit the way it does back and forth and so freely now, it's a big thing. But I think today or yesterday, we really focused on privacy, security, whether or not, what was the bias level of the data, and then a level of ethics, right? But I think if we go forward into AI governance, that now it really includes what's my clinical governance, what's my financial governance, and then you got operational governance, documentation governance, and so you've got all these different, and now reimbursement. So I think it changes things up a little bit. And it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves, but it's going to evolve quick because remember, OCR at the same time, the Office of Civil Rights is redoing all their HIPAA standards right now. And those are going to come out in 27, but they're adding for the first time because AI was never a part of HIPAA. So they're rewriting an entire section for nothing but for AI and how it will apply. So Doug, you brought up a good point. Oz and the administration, all departments, FDA, OCR, HHS, CMS, they're all coming together with a direction and a signal of where they're going.
I would say for me as an executive medical director to healthcare system, we're probably a little bit behind. We have to be super, super nervous about ownership and bias and the tools. But to go back to Sanjay's idea about clarity, where we talk about that, here we know it's level 1 evidence, right? 75,000 women, couple 100,000 mammograms showed a benefit. It was rapidly approved by the FDA for de novo, and it was immediately added to NCCN breast cancer screening guidelines, and I don't have it in my building. I should. I want to, but I can't afford it, right? And there's all of those things that are going around too. And so I think the clarity that's coming from the federal government this year will establish some of those rules. And you've been on commissions. I've been on a few commissions as well. They're talking about them. And we're starting to hear hints coming out of out of DC. They recognize the urgency to get some of this stuff done. But for the listeners, the downside is the more regulation, the less innovation. And so you're seeing that a little bit in Europe, where they're losing the AI arms race, whether you want to call it that or not, because they're regulating very heavily. And so it's this, you have to be able to hold both. You have to be enthusiastic about freedom and security. You have to be excited about the power of the possible and the great calamity that happens if we do it wrong. And I think that's why Sanjay and I feel so passionately, and you too, Jordan, about educating the doctors, because this is just mission critical for you. And for our people who are out there listening, we appreciate that you guys tune in for this stuff. We're trying to do it because we're spending 2.5 hours reading this. Jordan probably spent 10 hours reading it so that you can listen to it in 30 minutes and be up to speed at least. So when you go to a committee meeting at your hospital, you're not behind the administrators.
No, and I think you've got to know this going in. I mean, you've got to be able to talk because they may not understand. They may not even know what's going on, but this is going to continue to move and evolve very quickly. And when there's budget dollars in place of where they need to be put, if you're not in the conversation, your dollars are going somewhere else.
Where do we think we're going to start seeing these things kind of, trickle in first? When it comes to the entire, ecosystem, where are, you seeing it, Jordan, if anywhere, that you think we would see the most immediate impact or kind of have to make these decisions?
I mean, I think the biggest spots that, and we probably could all agree, is I think diagnostic radiology, I think pathology, I think those are the areas. I think the part that I haven't figured out is what about the non-clinical AI that could be used for like all the stuff that Oz talked about on the revenue cycle side, the redundancy, the prior authorization. It still needs to be paid for because somebody's got to buy the software, but there's not a clinical outcome per se, other than the doctor's not spending 10 hours a week doing peer-to-peers or whatever they're spending. So I think there's two sides to that. There's a pure clinical, and then there may be a kind of a hybrid clinical and an administrative set for AI. And it'll be interesting to see how the regulations really roll out for that. I think they're going to target the clinical first, and the reimbursement, because it's easier for them to measure, right? There's an outcome, there's not an outcome. I think it's easier for them to measure. So I think it'll go to the clinical areas first. But I also think it's going to signal that there's a lot of kind of just one-off point solutions in the non-clinical space. And I think this puts them on notice that, hey, I may not have enough gas in the tank, or I may need to be talking to some other companies or investors or creators to bring my stuff together with something else to create a bigger footprint, because it's going to become very difficult for the very, very niche one-offs, I think.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a ton in digital therapeutics. I think remote patient monitoring, I mentioned this in a LinkedIn post this week. I think that is going to be standard of care, bread and butter to take care of cancer patients. In 2026, the idea that you come back to see me 21 days later and I say, how'd it go? To me is such an anachronism that I don't understand it. And then I think as we see better integration of data, maybe personal health records and the interoperability that you always talk about, Sanjay, that these people are going to have access to everything and anything all at once. And so I don't know if it's going to be ambient scribes. I don't know if it's going to be the radiology overread or the adaptive radiotherapy planning, but probably what we're going to see early on is the back of the store functions. I think the rev cycle, prior auth, those are so easy. The pattern recognizers in radiology and in digital path.
Yeah, for sure. And I wonder, when it comes to some of the stuff that isn't necessarily on a patient to patient case basis, but are more system wide, if we, see similar standards that you expect, say, when they come into our chemo room, right? So we have these like standard things that they evaluate to make sure that our chemotherapy is being mixed correctly, and what are the different kind of pieces of equipment and tools being used for that. And you're meeting standards, knowing that some things may be substandard and have been replaced. And I wonder if AI is going to be at least, or some technology somewhat similar to that. So it's not so much like, okay, I can reimburse you for this one specific thing, but overall, in an institutional capacity, you are having less leakage or spillage, so to speak, because of where your technology is and what kind of things you have set up to be able to best serve your community and patients, to basically have a structural kind of roadmap and standard, across certain places that maybe, treat Medicare specifically and whatever else. You could really appreciate the complexity that starts to evolve with something so complicated.
But as the data sets get bigger, and this is where I'll ask Jordan this, because this is where I think people aren't quite ready, is we start with piecemeal stuff like rev cycle or prior auth. Help me do a note. That's something a doctor can write. We can put our brains around, like, help me with the prior auth note. But then when we say that when all this data is combined, you have a unified practice management where all central operations, all patient registration, all automated text, mail, email reminders, real-time insurance eligibility, rev cycle, prior auth, they're all bundled into one tool that comes from one agent that reports to another agent, that reports to another agent, that reports to a coordinator. That's where I think I lose the operators in my world, because they're like, wait, what? What are you even talking about? But that is exactly what's happening for the majority of the tech industry right now. And typically healthcare will lag 5 to 10 years behind, but I don't think it's a pipe dream to think eventually that's what's going to happen at the enterprise level.
No, you're 100% right. I think at the enterprise level, when you see a patient and close something out, that it knows at that point which next test to order, schedule their appointments, scheduling calls the patient, patient gets their whatever test, results come back to, like, all that is cascading and automated, not to where it's got to go to 6 different people. And I think that is already happening in other industries, right? That happens and we're going to lag behind, but it's absolutely 100% where it's going.
To that hospital administrator out there, my team, Jordan, what are you going to tell them to do with this information? Because obviously, Sanjay, this is still 6 or 12 months away from becoming a thing.
Right.
There will be all of these periods of comments where people will come back, and all the lobbyist groups are going to go to work now that this is out this week. Now everybody heads to DC with their own to-do list and their own want and wish list. And so what finally comes out may not resemble what we saw this week, but I'd love to help people who are doing strategic planning. Like, where do you place your bets? How do you get started? And for me, I always talk about, you don't even have to make a bet on the tools. Upskill your workforce. We could safely talk about that. And that's a safe thing for healthcare system to say, okay, I know it's coming. I don't even know. And I always say it's going to happen to us, through us, or with us. The reason Sanjay and I do these things is so it's with us.
Yeah.
And maybe the message for us is, come back. We're going to keep talking about this again. This is week 1 of many discussions, and we'll talk about having you back again with the next release. And,
Well, I think CMS made it clear, right? So they want people to respond, and it's not abnormal that when a proposed rule comes out that there'll be 30 or 40,000 responses, but it's to the entire house of medicine. There's stuff in radiology in there. There's stuff in rad-onc there. There's stuff in 340B. There's stuff in telehealth. There's stuff. I mean, so it's everything. This is a small section, although a powerful section. I think at a minimum, if I'm a hospital administrator, if I'm anybody, at a minimum, if I don't want to do anything other than just go to the comment and say, I agree with everything. Like, I agree with everything that's being proposed for AI in healthcare. At a minimum, that's your response. Now, how it relates to you and how you could evolve it and how you could fine tune it, add to it. They read every one of those comments. And so they read it, and that's what drives the final rule. So in the final rule, what you'll see is, the final rule is always twice as long, because what it goes through is it says commenters stated, commenters thought, and then at the very end, it'll say response. Based on reading all the comments, we're making this the final rule, and this is what we're going to do. So the comments are the most important. So at a minimum, you're logging in to comment and say, just give your thoughts on AI. AI is a good thing in healthcare. They want to see signal direction at a minimum. Add your flavor to it and what your thoughts are in detail, if you want to. But I think that's the bare minimum that you can do. And some of those predictions we talked about, I think, if I'm just looking over here, is algorithms we talked about are going to become commodities. The evidence is going to become the competitive advantage. So if I'm anybody in the space that's creating around here, this is what I'm thinking about. I think revenue cycle becomes part of product development. So you're going to have to understand some of that. I think governance becomes the market differentiator for some people. That's going to be a big one. And
I do. I think it's going to be the companies will consolidate. You no longer will people buy point solutions because you need it all.
Bingo. And so to your point on the point solutions, I think this is part of the governance, and why they're raising the bar and they're going to monitor this is because they know inevitably they're going to flush out a bunch of the points. The full point, they just don't have enough gas in the tank to get there.
Yeah.
And that's fine. That's okay. So to your point, either hit your trailer to something else and work with other people to try to make something more complete, because that's where it's going to go.
Yeah, that's why I think it's remote patient monitoring. That's so critical from a reduction of calamity. That's what I hear them talking about a lot is, and that's what we're graded on. All of our HEDIS criteria, everything a hospital is graded on, everything U.S. News and World Report grades on, everything CMS 5-star grades on is ultimately related to reducing the number of people who need a hospital, ironically. And so that's what they're going to pay for. If we can reduce expensive inpatient stays with tools that keep people as an outpatient because we identified their illness earlier, that's going to be outcomes-based, cost-based, because that's really what they're doing. They're not doing this for health reasons. They're doing this for cost reasons.
No, and I think that segues into number 4 and number 5 is hospitals will buy platforms. Hospitals will not buy solutions or algorithms. They're buying platforms. Just like Doug said, they're going to buy integrated, inclusive platforms. And then the last one is interesting. I'd love to get y'all's thoughts is healthcare AI companies increasingly are going to resemble pharmaceutical companies, meaning they're going to have clinical trials, economic studies, evidence generation, coverage strategy, medical affairs, post-market surveillance. Would love to get y'all's thoughts on that because that's heavy. I mean, that's a lot to unpack just on that one, but I think that's where it goes.
Yep.
I mean, I think you're exactly right. Is that there's just so many elements and parts that require their own dedicated attention and context for what these platforms bring. And if you don't have everything surrounding that from a during and post and ongoing surveillance, monitoring, these terms that we're used to, governance, then it's going to be problematic and it's going to be a recursive process. Like that's what's crazy. That's what's, I'm just eager to see what's going to happen. Like these things continue to build upon themselves. They continue to get better. They continue to surface issues that you can address. It is not an out the box kind of set and done thing. And so really it underscores the importance of one, monitoring those things, but two, what you can get out of them when it comes to these clinical trials, like you were stating, and these other things that, again, you classically see with pharmaceutical companies.
And Doug brought up a good point. I think other than we can kind of how we want to leave with this or whatever, but we're able to produce evidence so fast now. Evidence used to take weeks, months, years, and now we can do it. So for, 10, 20 years ago, we rushed again on accuracy, but now we're rushing on healthcare AI is going to compete on evidence. And I think that's another really, really big one. I can't claim this one, but this was good. It says, accuracy gets you FDA clearance, evidence gets you reimbursement, documentation gets you paid, governance keeps you trusted, outcomes keep you reimbursed, and companies that understand that that transition today will be the companies that everyone else is trying to catch 5 years from now.
Oh, that's good. That's very true too.
Doug's going to get t-shirts printed, man. It's going to be great. So, but no, this is, again, this is not to overwhelm anybody. It's happening. Okay. The worst thing you can do is just put your head in the ground. But if you just look around and say, okay, other people are talking about this, I should be in the conversation, then you're in the mix with everybody else. Because this one's definitely moving forward. It's going to happen. And you actually have a chance. And that's what they're asking for is we don't have it figured out. Help us steer it, help us define it. That's what they're asking for.
Before we heard that we were going to be able to have this clinical decision kind of reimbursement with these AI tools, one of the concerns that I had that I thought we were headed towards, which may still be the case in some aspects, is the concept of DTC related healthcare kind of investigation. Meaning, if you don't have somebody that's going to compensate for potentially a prognostic marker, like what's going to help you respond to your cancer best and has some good data and it's validated, etc. If it's not going to be reimbursed, now you might have this kind of uncomfortable and unfair position to where family members are saying, oh, well, do I want to pay $150? Like I may want to do that for my spouse or for my parents, and I do think there's going to be some of that also happening regardless, just because you're starting to see all these great, healthcare apps and all of these kind of optional things you could do. I don't know if you've, seen Whoop or Hume Health, but you can buy these cardio panels and all this stuff directly from labs. So there is this subculture that's happening where patients are, if not being involved, but actually somewhat driving the diagnostic investigation. So it'll be interesting to see how that continues to evolve. But I think having something like this will hopefully let it continue to be collaborative and not something that, patients have to feel they have to kind of escape or do on their own, because now we actually have a means to reimburse it, to your previous point, Jordan.
No, I think you're spot on, and that's going to be huge. I mean, we saw that in biomarker testing, right? So biomarker testing, states have passed legislation. Mississippi is one of them. We passed last session that biomarker testing, to your point, was being done by people kind of in a roundabout way. But now it's mandated. It's got to be covered by payer, right? And so I think that's the thing is once the financial component comes in, we already knew the value of it, and so then we move it forward.
Yeah.
Sanjay and I have talked about this once before, Jordan, and this is probably something that I hope is starting to sink in because we really believe in this, that at this point, the technologies are great. They're here, right? Enough that we could save many, many lives if we just introduce the tools that are currently developed. The economic engine has been missing. Is this that first step that you start to do that? And then I don't think at this point the barrier is going to be those two things. I think it's going to be trust. And so platforms like this, the newsletter that you write, Sanjay, this awesome podcast that you built, with blood, sweat, and tears for 4 years now.
Yeah.
This is how we're trying to get the word out to people who don't have the time that we have to make dedicating ourselves to figuring this stuff out because it is moving quickly.
So like Doug's just serving up lobs here. He threw the word trust in there. So here you go, Doug. Strategic governance builds trust. Trust drives adoption, and adoption drives the value.
100%.
Love it.
We don't have a deficiency of information anymore at all. And it's not just a deficiency of tools or things that, we get 6 flavors of the same thing, even the information. And I think that's where we're going to enter this era of like, okay, I don't have trouble learning what I can do, but who do I listen to be able to navigate what these different choices and options are? And I don't have the answer to that. Like, that's where we really just all have to come together as a tribe. I think it's Jordan. I think that's why we have him here today.
Watch out.
Thanks for coming on again, buddy. We really appreciate it. We'll have you back here soon. And for the audience, hope you learned something. Read his stuff, read our stuff, and we'll try and get you there.
We appreciate it. Y'all have a good one.